everybody. I believe we are live. I'm Amanda Surya. I'm a developer relations manager here at Google.
And I'm Danny Hermes. On Amanda's team, I'm a developer programs engineer, as many will know who come to this hangout every other week.
Sorry about the delay a little bit today. We were having a bit of technical difficulties, but now we're on. So Danny, what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to talk about a feature that isn't that well known, and we didn't do a whole lot of press about when we released it, but it's a feature, it's an additional feed called the user management feed, and it's a way you can add more authenticated users to your accounts, whether they're sub-accounts of an MCA or whether they're just your own account and they're people who are doing certain work, local only or online only. You can use the API to add more users.
And for the benefit of our viewers here who may not know what an MCA is, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so for people who aren't familiar, a multi-client account is a special type of Merchant Center account that doesn't actually hold product data. Rather, it holds accounts that hold data. So it's literally a parent for all these sub-accounts. And via the API, which we'll see in a bit, you can actually use the API to, within an MCA, create sub-accounts. And we will actually create a sub-account with my MCA that I personally own. And from there, we'll add some users to that sub-account as well. But an MCA, like I said, it's really just a parent that holds accounts rather than holding data, product data.
Awesome. So how about the merchant account and the user's relationship? Do you want to go into that?
So you know, the user's API, the user management feed, can actually be used whether or not it's a sub-account of an MCA or not. So, you know, if you have a lot of users who are working on your product data, let's say you have a team that does local only and a team that does online only, and you don't want them to be interfering with each other's data, then you could, you know, use the user's API to really just give permissions to your local folks and permissions to your online folks so they don't interfere with each other. But really, the best use case is, you know, like you mentioned, when you have a multi-client account and, you know, maybe you're a marketplace and you want to have your individual sub-sellers have access to their own sub-accounts. You can, using the user management feed, you can do this programmatically rather than having to go into the actual, the Merchant Center for every single sub-account and through the interface click through and add users. This is a much more programmatic, extendable workflow. So I have the user management feed document pulled up, so I want to just share this with some folks. This is on our docs at developers.google.com. You know, there's a nice overview at the top explaining what it does, and then to review how someone would add users. It's a simple post request containing very little data. So it contains a title element, and that title is simply the email of the user you're looking to add. It contains a Boolean value specifying whether this user is an admin or not. So that's in the SC namespace, a namespace we're very familiar with. It's an alias we use for schemas.google.com/structured content/2009. And then we also have permissions. Like I said, you can silo your people on your team who are dealing with online data and dealing with local data because you have separate permission scopes for online and for local. And here we see online is set to the value read write and local set to the value no access, but there's a third value which is read only, which is sort of in between read write and no access. You know, someone can see the data, but they can't actually tamper with the data. So, you know, there are a lot of options you can use. And then, of course, with that data, you simply make a post request to a URI that looks pretty familiar, content.googleapis.com/content/v1, and then your account ID that they're going to be added to, and then /users. And there are, you know, similar URIs for making updates and deletes. It's that same URI I just listed, but after users, there's here john.doe@shop.com, but it's really just the email address that you're looking to update or to delete. And then, of course, you're sending the same type of data in that request back. So let's get started and actually use a client library to actually do these things. So let me switch the screen that I'm sharing with you guys in this Hangout.
Let's backtrack a little bit, Danny.
Okay.
For can you explain what's the benefit of the client libraries and how many languages we
have? So for those not familiar, we have client libraries in 4 programming languages: Python, Java, .NET, and PHP. And this feature is currently supported in .NET and Python only, but it's coming to PHP hopefully within the next 2 weeks, maybe less.
You're working on it, right?
I'm working on it. It's something. It's one of the easier APIs to implement because, as we saw, the spec is pretty short. You only have permissions, admin, and title. We've already implemented, right? So it's pretty easy to do. Java, I don't have an ETA for that, but so client libraries in general allow you to abstract away everything. So you don't have to actually deal with creating HTTP requests, making sure the headers are correct, making sure you're doing all that correctly. You don't have to deal with making the XML. You don't have to deal with the authentication, whether you're using client login, which is deprecated, OAuth 2, or some other auth flow, right? These libraries just do all that work for you, and we try to document them and create samples like this as frequently as possible so they're more usable, and also so the APIs are more usable, so you can really worry about your systems and your data rather than actually implementing an XML parser and implementing an HTTP library.
So where can they download this client library?
If you come to our developer docs at developers.google.com/shopping-content, we have a developer resources tab that you can click that has an end-to-end sample for using the items feed in all 4 languages, and each of those lists the various places. They're all hosted. The code itself is hosted open source on Google Code Hosting, and there are various links in those sub-pages within the developer resources on our documentation.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. Let's get to it.
Yeah, let's get to it. So here we have my Emacs buffer open with 2 files, createsubaccount.py and createsubaccount.cs. Now, since Python is a dynamic language, I can actually run the text we see, whereas using this C# file, I would have to compile it first. So I don't actually have literal C# code that would run, but just the C# code that you would embed within your class or within your function that you're calling. And they're going to be equivalent. They're going to do exactly the same thing, the Python and the C#. So we see at the top, we have our imports and our using statements. Import in Python, using in C#. So first, this is just for protecting my own account security, but I'm importing the pickle library because I'm going to actually use that to unpickle a token that I'm going to use to sign my request. And to use the API, you actually have to sign the request to verify that the account you're using is actually your account. And then from there, I'm importing some custom classes. So from the atom.data module, I'm importing the content, link, and title classes. And these are classes I'm going to use to actually create the content that's going into a managed accounts insert request. So content's for description, link is for a relative link for that sub-account, and title is the title of the sub-account. And from the gdata.content for shopping.client module, I'm going to import the content for shopping client class, and that class is the client that's making these HTTP requests, and that's taking your data and actually turning it into valid XML, and then of course receiving the request or the response and letting us know what it is. And finally, from the gdata.content for shopping.data module, it's a more specific data module, specific only to our version, our GData API, that is. I'm importing adult content, client account, internal ID, and user's entry. A user's entry is going to be our parent entry that's actually, actually I don't need user entry in this file. I don't know why I'm importing it. That's my mistake. I forgot to delete this line. But the other two, adult content and internal ID, are there in order to have additional settings set when we're inserting this this managed account. So on the other hand, all this is already brought in when we bring in when we use the namespace google.gdata.content for shopping, google.gdata.content-for-shopping.elements, and google.gdata.client. Those 3 namespaces hold virtually the same sort of data for the .NET client library that the ones I just spoke about for Python hold. So from there, let me scroll down a bit. I am setting an account ID as a constant and loading an auth token from a pickled file. So I have this file token.pkl, and I'm opening it, read-only opening it as this file object fh, and then I'm using pickle to load from fh an auth token. Okay, and on the C# side, again, I have this variable account ID, and I'm right away using it to instantiate a service via the content for shopping service class, and I'm passing in my account ID to that class. And I have left the code out here, but if you'd like to go check out our developer docs, I explain in depth how you can actually log in and authenticate with that service class. But I'm going to be using the token over here, which is already authenticated. So here I instantiate a content for shopping client class with the auth token that I've just unpickled and the account ID that I've set as a constant in this file. Okay, so now I want to actually create a sub account. So I have this sub account, and I'm just going to start out with an empty client account object. First, I'll set the title. So the title, my sub account, is just Candy Shop. Then I want to actually set the description, and that's in the content element. So the description is the best place for candy, new_subaccount.content equals content, and we pass into the constructor for that class our string, the best place for candy. Our actual account, the merchant site, is going to be hosted at candyshop.example.com. So we create a link to that using the atom.data.link class, and that's going to be rel equals alternate. This is one of the XML attributes. And we just append this to the link attribute on our sub account object that we've created. And then finally, we use these custom content for shopping data attributes, adult content and internal ID, to say, no, there is no adult content that's going to be provided by this account. And the internal ID that we use to refer to this account is CND SHP. This is, not necessarily features you need to use, but these are features you can use with your account. So in order to actually insert this, we'll have our shopping client that we created. It's authenticated because we already created it with a token, and it knows what the parent account is because we also passed it an account ID when we constructed it. So by simply calling shopping client dot insert client account and passing in the new sub account, I'll actually be able to insert my account. And from the response we get, inserted _ sub account, we'll actually be able to get an account ID of this account we created. So let me quickly spawn a Python REPL. This is one of the other great features of Emacs that I love. And I can actually directly run my code within Emacs from this buffer. So I'm going to just call this command to run the code. And now we send our request off to the server. And there we go. We got the response back, and the actual ID link that's in the inserted sub account we got back is content.googleapis.com/content/v1. It has our parent account ID. You see there, right there, 8403459. Then /manage accounts. Then /8825929. And this is something we're going to be using going forward to actually create users for sub accounts. So let me just paste this right here so I can use it in a bit. But before we move on to actually using the user management feed, let me just show what this would have looked like in C#. So switching back to the C# buffer from my Python buffer, we see it looks pretty much the same. We have a managed accounts entry that's pretty much the same as the client account class in Python. We start off with a new sub account, which is an empty managed accounts entry. We set the title via the title.text attribute on the object. The title is actually a getter, which automatically does this class conversion that we did explicitly in Python, but here we just give the string, and this library does the rest. Similarly, for the description, we use the content.content attribute. For link, we have an atom link object. Atom link comes from the Google.gdata client namespace. And to insert it with our service, after we've added the various other attributes, we simply call the insert managed account method. And pass in our sub account, and we will expect the same type of results. And from the ID, we will expect the same value that we saw before.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. So now that we have a sub account, the candy shop, we want to actually add a user to the candy shop. And so I'm going to use the actual account that I had for Google I/O to actually add this to the sub account. So let's see if this works. So we're going to pull up the two new buffers, create user entry.cs, and create. Let me get this in my clipboard first, and then of course create user entry.py. So I have here type sub account here. So I'm going to type the sub account that we've now created, so when the code runs, it actually won't break. So at the top, we again have pickle. We're importing pickle for the same reasons, for a token. We're again importing the title attribute. Again importing the content for shopping client attribute. We're importing some new data classes. Admin and permission are data classes specific to the user management feed. Admin, as we saw before, specifies whether or not this particular user is an admin. And then permission is a way we can set online and local permission scopes. And then, of course, we actually mean to import users entry here. Users entry is the class which will hold all this data.
That's right.
So with that, we have our parent ID, which is what we're actually going to do. I guess I don't necessarily need this here. I'm using it in the constructor for the client, but it's actually going to be overridden in every request. So you actually don't explicitly need to construct a client with an account ID, because for every individual API request that you're making, like we saw before, insert client account, you can actually pass in an optional keyword argument that gives an account ID. And that's what we're going to do here when we're dealing with these users entries, because we don't want to create a user on our MCA. We want to create a user for the candy shop.
That's right.
Okay? So again, I'm loading the pickled token, and again, I'm instantiating the client. So from there, to create the actual entry, I start off with an empty users entry object. I set the title. The title is going to be the email, as we saw in the actual spec in the documentation. So this is an email address for my demo account. We don't want it to be an admin. We don't want special privileges given for this. We just want them to be able to actually deal with their data. And for the online permission, we instantiate an object from the permission class. We give it the value read write, and then we use the keyword argument scope and pass that the value online. Now we use a keyword argument here because the GData Python library considers keyword arguments to correspond to XML attributes rather than an XML value or an XML element. So if we want to specify the attributes, we use a keyword argument. So similarly for the local permission, we also set read write, but instead we have the scope set to local. And to add those to the entry we've created, we simply append to the entry.permission attribute the permission objects we've just created. So now, if we want to actually insert this, we simply call the insert users entry method on the shopping client object, and we pass in the entry we've just created. And like I said before, since we don't want to actually add this user to our MCA, we include account ID equals new sub account ID, and it will be set on the sub account rather than on our account. Okay? So after we do this, we're going to print out the ID from the actual returned object. So again, we'll go back to our Python REPL and we'll run this. So let's see what happens. So I was worried that would happen. So the issue here is that sub account is already associated with another account, and we're not allowed to actually to set it on more than one account. So let me instead use Amanda's account. So Amanda S, google.com. Okay. So let's run it on somebody who doesn't already have an account that they're associated with. Wonderful. So here it works as expected.
Now I have access.
Now she has access to the candy shop. Now let me reiterate what just happened there with that error. So the account that I was attempting to add was already associated with another Merchant Center account, and it's explicitly disallowed that an account can be associated with more than one Merchant Center account. So of course the API says no. we can't do that because it's already associated. So instead we use an account that's not associated with any other accounts. So content.googleapis.com/content/v1. Then we have the sub account ID, then /users, then / the email that we added. And that is what we expect to happen. So hypothetically speaking, well, actually, before I move on to my hypotheticals, let me show the equivalent code for .NET. Exactly. Thank you, Amanda. So again, the same rigmarole. We start with our account ID and the created sub-account ID. This is not the same value. I didn't change it. But again, we instantiate a service. If we want to have the actual user's entry object, we again start with an empty one. This comes from a namespace we've already brought in using. Set the title, and again we have these custom setters and getters, admin and permission, which will actually do the work for us in converting to the classes. So admin we set to false, and permissions we're actually setting to where permissions is actually a list, and we're adding permissions as we go. So we have this online read write and local read write, and then of course to insert it we simply call the insert user method. So now on to my hypothetical. Let's say the user we've just added is interfering with the way we're managing this sub account. They're deleting things that we've inserted, or they're making edits that they didn't tell us about, or overall they're just sort of creating problems for us that we don't want to deal with. So rather than giving them, well, eventually we'll kick them out. That'll be the second stage, the second hypothetical stage. But first, before we say, you don't have any privileges at all, we're going to just change the permissions they have, which is what we can do, right? So we're actually going to update the user. So rather than posting, inserting, we're going to send a put, which will update. So let me pull up these files, update userentry.py and update userentry.cs. So I actually will need to, let me see if it's still in my clipboard. If not, I'll need to go get the sub account again. Nope, not my clipboard anymore. So I need to pull up this other file briefly. Sorry about this. One moment. Oops, no, that's good. Yes, so I need to get the sub account ID so we can actually make operations on it. The client needs the sub account ID for when it actually creates the URIs that it's making requests to, right? So again, the same things as before. We don't actually need some of the data classes that we imported before because we're only changing permissions.
Right.
So we create our client, and using the client, the signed client with the token we have, we are going to call the get users entry method. And I've got to change this email again because the demo email is not going to be working. So we're going to call get users entry on this authenticated client with the first argument an email, and then we're using the keyword argument account ID to specify which account this user is coming for. And this will actually return the user's entry object that we created before. This is one of the great things of using this library is it does all the work taking the XML return from this and parsing it back into an object that we understand. All the
heavy lifting.
Yeah, it does all the heavy lifting, exactly. So once we have this entry object, we're going to clear the permissions. So we're just going to set the permission attribute to the empty list and then recreate new online permission and new local permission objects where we set the online permission to read only. So no longer can you actually change the objects, and the local permission, even worse, we say no access. You have no more access to local data. Sorry, you were bad. And then we add these permissions to the entry and simply call the update users entry method. And this does many of the same things, sends the same body, etc., but changes the HTTP verb from a post to a put. And then after that, we're going to print the ID just to make sure everything worked as we expected. So again, let me pull up my Python REPL and run this. Okay, so there we have it. It ran successfully. I'm going to skim over the. I'm not going to talk about the .NET code. We've seen it already. We have the same ideas. I'll just note that the actual method that we're calling update entry simply takes this inserted entry that we've retrieved. And similarly, we can retrieve the entry by specifying the email address and the account ID. But when we call update entry, we don't actually need to send the account ID because it's actually on the object itself as the ID element, okay? So finally, as Amanda said, there's one more hypothetical situation that we might be worried about. And that's where even with read-only, somebody is using the data incorrectly. Maybe somebody left an organization and they still have access, or maybe somebody is just off the product or moved on to a different project and they want to, the merchant that you're managing the account for wants them gone, right? So we have obviously a delete function, and that uses the HTTP delete verb. So that's the last thing we'll do. We will delete this user entry. So again, let me go get the sub account ID so we can paste it in. Okay. So, it's the same sort of things before. We have one extra import we haven't seen before, and we'll see in a bit why we do that. But from the generic gdata.client module, I'm going to be importing the request error class. And this is a generic error, which all errors inherit from in this library. And we're going to do that because after we've deleted someone, we expect the next time we try to retrieve them, they're not there. So we actually expect a 404 not found error. So we're going to, after we delete, make sure the delete succeeded, okay? So again, same type of stuff at the beginning. It's just in here so the code runs. We instantiate a client object that we can make requests with. We use the get users entry method with, I've got to update that email again. So, hey, there we go. I spelled it right the first time. For the first time.
Everybody knows my email.
Yeah, sorry about that, Amanda. So we call the get users entry method with the email and the sub account ID that we've created to retrieve the entry again after we've updated, after we've reset the permissions. And then we call delete users entry, and we pass in the entry that we've just retrieved, and as a keyword argument, we pass in our account ID. It's much of the same, right? And rather than actually getting a parsed user's entry object back, as we got when we called get, insert, and update, we just get a response object. And that response object has certain things like the status code, the reason, and the payload if there is any payload. For a delete, with our API, there actually won't be any payload. It'll just be an empty string. But after doing this, I'm going to again ask the API to retrieve this sub account. So again, I've got to change the email. I believe this is the last time I've got to change the email. I was 1 for 4 on spelling it right on the first time. So again, we'll try to retrieve it using get users entry. And if it succeeds, we'll say our status was 200. But if it does not succeed, we will catch an exception, request error. We'll catch it, and we'll save it to the variable exception within the scope of the exception. And we'll save our status instead as the status of that exception. And of course, we're hoping that we get a 404.
Right.
So the expected output of this is, excuse me, that the delete will succeed. Actually, let's add a print statement in here to get the status of our delete response. So first it'll print hopefully 200, and actually let's also print the reason for it. So 200 OK is what we're going to expect. First to be printed after the delete succeeds, after Amanda has been completely removed from this sub account. And then for the second stage, when we try to retrieve it, we expect a status of 404. So let's actually run it, and let's see.
All right.
There's the first, 200 OK, and the second, 404. So there you have it.
No longer have access.
A delete works, and after doing all these bad things and finally being moved off the project, Amanda no longer has access to the sub account that we had created. So with that, it looks like we don't have any live questions, obviously, and no questions from the moderator this week. But we do have one announcement to make. I'll let Amanda make that announcement.
Well, if you're interested in doing this sort of stuff that we do in terms of developer relations work, our team is hiring. So if you're interested, visit developers.google.com/jobs and check out our open positions there and apply. And again, thank you, Danny, for walking us through how to manage MCA and sub accounts.
Sure thing.
I think a lot of our marketplaces, merchants will benefit from this.
Certainly.
And again, if you have any questions for us, we're doing this bi-weekly. So in 2 weeks, we're doing another hangout.
Yep.
Or you can also visit our forum and read the docs. And if you have any questions, visit our forum or join us in 2 weeks.
Yes. We will see you all August 16th at 10 a.m.
That's right. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.